Welcome to a special edition of the BioCentury This Week podcast. Today we are coming to you from one of the most active biotech hubs in the world, Shanghai. On today's podcast, we will deliver the key takeaways from the 12th annual BioCentury Bay Helix China Healthcare Summit with our special guests, Matt Hewitt, VP and CTO of Charles River's Manufacturing Business Division. We have Bing Wang, CFO of China Biotech, kind of high-flying China Biotech, Akeso. And we have John Zhu of DualityBio. He's the CEO of this company that got the current wave of biotech IPOs rolling on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange late last year, I think it was. From the BioCentury side, we have the illustrious Simone Fishburn.
Illustrious this week, okay.
Our editor-in-chief, vice president, and notorious Washington Commanders fan, Josh Berlin, who's actually the man behind the curtain of all of our conferences, as you heard at the beginning of today.
And I'm gonna go. I think he is the heart and soul of the China Healthcare Summit.
He is the heart and soul.
Heart and soul.
Yeah. Tough bar there, but I've been called worse.
This is the nicest we're ever going to be, Josh. So take it,
All right. Well, you may have heard the term China speed. Has anybody heard that term before? Yeah.
Yeah, China speed.
Well, buckle up. Few of us just toured the Zhongjiang Science Park, me for the first time, where top biopharmas from around the world and around China have set up shop. And I'm here to tell you that clinical trials in China are getting even faster, if you can believe that. So we'll talk the accelerating pace of clinical development on today's podcast. We'll also talk about Innovent's $1.2 billion deal with Takeda and why the move is a giant step toward global innovation for the Suzhou company. And green shoots in the financing market are coming in the form of capital flowing again here in China and an IPO market, as I just mentioned, in Hong Kong, that's kind of leaving NASDAQ in the dust when it comes to IPOs, at least. None of this, of course, could happen without talent, and I'm looking around the room here and I see a lot of talent. We'll discuss how China's talent pool is rapidly evolving, and we'll also talk about the direction of biotech innovation. Simone, let's start with accelerating clinical trials. What have you learned this week? What have you seen?
Right. So, for context, I wasn't on that tour, just to stipulate that. But I heard great things about it, and you're going to talk about it in a minute maybe. But, sitting through a really extraordinary couple of days of panels, some take-homes that we got, well, I think it's very well known inside China, and our message really is to people in the other ecosystems, the US and Europe, really understanding what an impact it's going to have globally, the way that clinical trial starts are accelerating in China. China is really setting a new bar for this. We're seeing, one of the most important, perhaps under-recognized in the West, moves that was by Biotech, who were in Europe trying to get things done on very little money and realizing that the way to do that for them was to come and run their clinical trial in China and in a very short amount of time. And what did we talk about with 4 patients or fewer even, maybe even fewer than that. They flipped that into a deal with AstraZeneca. And so, my feeling really is that China's setting a new bar. We're seeing the UK set itself new standards for reverting to what it used to do and going beyond that in terms of accelerating clinical trials. And we all know that this really is the biggest bottleneck in drug development, is going from discovery into humans. I mean, that is the bit that takes forever and where, your failure rates are very high. And so if you can really bend the curve on how long it takes you to get, in speeding up getting that human clinical data, you can really start to change the paradigm. And I personally think that might be where China has a massive impact globally. So those are my thoughts on that. Do you want to pick it up from there?
Sure. Thank you, Simone. I think you nailed it. I think having Jean-Pierre on the stage yesterday was a perfect example of the integration of China's innovation in the global stage. Here is a very scrappy entrepreneur, have much lower resources than compared to some of the US, California, Boston biotech.
Can I just interrupt to say, just for the audience, this is Jean-Pierre Laterre, the CEO of Akeso Biotech.
Yes,
right?
thank you. Yes, Jean-Pierre, Akeso Biotech. Very scrappy, very talented entrepreneur, really made the much smaller raise. I think he did not even break 20 million euros in terms of his total raise. And he was able to get a lot accomplished with that capital, right? Comparable to some of the bigger, without naming names, some of the bigger US in vivo CAR T companies, and able to create enough data from both translational quality of the vectors, as well as some human data to get AstraZeneca says, we feel pretty de-risked about this platform, and actually did very, very well for his product, for his platform, and for his investors. And I think that story really nailed it in terms of the last 2 days of how China is part of the global system today.
So I want to take it a step further and play to my internal crowd here, and a couple of compliments within this. I think there are certain times and certain deals, quite often, or events, that some people at the time recognize their importance going forward. Others take longer. You could look at the Legend deal with J&J as a really seminal deal for understanding the value of China innovation. I think what you've just pointed to, many people may have whiffed on that, but that deal that Akeso Biotech did and then getting bought, I would say Akeso itself has certainly made a massive splash in terms of making people understand, wow, I mean, that just changed the whole paradigm. And obviously you got a lot of followers there, Duality, doing similar things. And what you've done, like the IPO recently is like, oh, wait, things are actually happening, and the boldness of doing that. And so I think that there are more stories coming out of China that we're able to look at globally and say maybe that was the point at which the trajectory took a slightly different turn up and up. And it's the accumulation of these things. As I said, everybody who's coming to the China conference, Josh, you can pick it up from me in a minute, but we've been coming to this China conference for years. We've known it for years, but for me, it really feels like 2025 is the year that biotech globally woke up to China, but it's had all these markers all the way along.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Simona. And we had a tremendous number of folks out this week in Shanghai. A lot of our Western friends, both from Europe and the US, who had not been out to China before or hadn't been out frequently. And I think some of it is the deal flow that everybody's reading about. It's almost a deal of the week kind of news flow. And we obviously saw the huge deal this week that sort of coincided with the launch of the event, the Innovent Takeda deal. That news flow, I think, has become almost impossible to ignore. And I think even those who might have sort of discounted what was happening in China, even a year ago, are now reassessing and trying to understand what's happening out here, and also whether there might be opportunities for them, much like the Akeso Biotech example. We had quite a few European and Western VCs out this week, also looking, I think, on behalf of their portfolio companies. They were out here also, I think, looking for potentially newcos and other ways to access innovation, but also thinking about how their own portfolio companies in the West might be able to also accelerate R&D and accelerate proof of concept by perhaps leveraging China.
Yeah, we had the managing director of Google Ventures out. I think it was
Krishna.
Yeah, Krishna, I think it was his first time out, if I remember correct. And we're going to dig into the Innovent deal in just a moment, but I want to go over to Matt and get us back to the speed of the trials. And Matt, he doesn't live in Shanghai, but he's here all the time. Matt, from your perspective, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, playing in a lot of the therapeutic development side, what we see is that companies in general, regardless of modality, are truly searching for an environment which colloquially we would call it a fast test, fast fail. So it's important to get to clinic as efficiently as possible. And then once you get to clinic, it's important to get that, if we want to call it value inflection point data, that tells you whether or not an asset or a program has a chance at success, whether it's going to late phase or potentially going to commercial at some point. And over the last, from what I've seen, 7 to 8 years here in China, I mean, things have really matured. And that's been from multiple perspectives, whether it's the IIT design, the kind of relaunch of the regulatory framework and from NMPA. And we have a lot of talent that's been coming back to China, and I know we'll talk about that soon. But point being is that the framework here has been streamlined such that you can move assets through much very efficiently. And it has woken up, I think, other parts of the world as well, as to that this is now beginning to look like a trendsetter.
Can I just quickly follow up to ask you to elaborate on something that we discussed earlier, which is, we talked when I did a story a few months ago about how different regulatory agencies across the world are looking at risk differently and how that is actually changing the pace of getting into the clinic. Can you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, so in the past, we've kind of talked about what's phase appropriate for companies as they're moving products through development into clinical. In the US, as an example, we typically divide things into early and late phase clinical. And depending on the modality, it's either phase 1 or it's phase 1 or phase 2. And it really depends upon when you're going into a potentially pivotal phase. I think what we have kind of retermed that this year is it's not really phase appropriate, but it's risk appropriate, because that's how the regulators view the world. They don't view the world through data, they view the world through risk. And so the idea is that the regulators are looking for a path that is most efficient, where you can provide the highest quality product or therapy to patients at the lowest risk. I think what we've seen here is that there's been a very collaborative approach to understanding what the proper risk is for each phase, so that we can move things very efficiently and so we can try to provide patients with cutting-edge therapies that they need.
I think what was very helpful last 2 days, you hear from Li Chen at Hua, you heard it from funding from McKinsey, that the government here is very, very responsive, and will actually iterate with the industry and how to make things better, from both translation, from both an IND process, clinical, all the way to, they even talked about a novel way of beyond the NRDL, how to actually get this to patients through just additional way of paying. So I think the government here is very, very responsive to the needs of the industry.
And thanks, Bing. I want to get the names out there so our listeners who aren't with us here in the room, and Matt appreciated the points there. I want to bring John into the conversation now. So for those of you who might not be familiar with Duality, you might be living under a rock.
I was going to say that 3 people out there who've been spent the last 2 years in the desert.
Someone out there may not have heard. But for those of you, as I mentioned, the IPO, one of the top deal-making China biotechs, I think 4 deals, all for ADCs. So you're in the clinic. From where you sit, what are you seeing evolve with clinical trials?
Yeah, first of all, we went to IPO April this year. So April 15th to be exact.
Wow.
And I still remember when we go to Hong Kong for the roadshow, which is April 7th. That's exactly the trade war happens. And the Hong Kong Hang Seng Index was down like 15% in 1 day. And people think we are crazy because we want to do the IPO
I remember
roadshow.
everyone going, that was bold, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got the time wrong. I mean, China speed is so fast, if I may borrow a line from Stephen Wright. It's like putting instant coffee in a microwave and going back in time. But John.
Yeah. And yes, so we have about 6 deals. Total deal size is $6 billion. And from payment and the new milestone, we collect more than $500 million. So we did get cash. We can really can help us to survive for a while. And talk about a clinical trial. This is one of our vision from day one, become a global biopharma. By global, meaning that we really want to, for patients, global. And we want to build a global clinical team and a global product. So right now we have about more than 200 employees, about 30 of them are in the US. So by the global trial, which I mean is really MRCT from day one, the downside is that it's actually more costly to do clinical trial in the US, as you can tell. But we feel that because we want to become a global biopharma, it's really we have to demonstrate the efficacy and the safety in global patients, including US patients. And talk about speed up the clinical trial. To be honest, the sentencing you cannot do, right? I mean, you have to give drug to patients. They have to go through cycle 1, cycle 2, right? The sentencing, you just have to respect the law. Of course, you have to respect the quality. Why we think like Chinese biotech, we are faster? If you think about that, right? I think the reason we are faster is that sometimes we can cut the what we call white space. Just give you one example, right? We deliver the IND from IND to first patient in. Some companies take like 3 months or 4 months, and they think it's normal. We think it's not normal. We take like 1 month, 45 days, first patient in, right? And from our first patient in to end of phase 2 meeting, 20 months. And people think it will take like 3 years and 4 years normal. We think 20 months. So we do work hard. We can cut some white space. But in the end, Jeff, I think most important thing is that you need to have a clear clinical strategy. That's most important to really solve our unmet medical needs. That's number one. And number two, you really have to understand both the US practice and the China practice. And sometimes there are synergy between each other. In China, for example, enrollment is actually indeed faster. So currently we have, more than 2,700 patients worldwide. 50% of them are actually ex-China, including US and Australia. But the China patients actually help us a lot, right? So when we design MRCT, that's the beauty of MRCT. Instead of doing China only or US only, you're not helping each other, right? Just give you one example. We have a partnership with Biotech for HER2 ADC, CHOP2, and BioCentury ADC. I just give you one example regarding BioCentury ADC, which is a very good target, expressed in multiple tumors, including small cell lung cancer, CRPC, HCC, cervical cancer. Our first patient in is 2023, July. At that time, Daiichi is way ahead of us. Now we enrolled more than 600 patients. We have shown indications, for example, in like HCC, cervical cancer, show signals even ahead of Daiichi. So let's talk about the China speed. I'll stop here. Yeah.
So I want to actually follow up to both of you guys with something that you said there, which is that you said that from day one, you decided to be a global biotech. And I don't know if Akeso has made that same decision. It does bring us back to the Innovent story. And what was notable really in that deal, I mean, you might want to talk about it a little bit also, is the fact that they retained 40% rights to 40% of the, both costs and profits in the US. And I'm wondering whether this mold, which Beijing B1 has really been the pioneer of in terms of starting, like being a China-based company that started with a global outlook, and if you think that we're going to have more and more China companies that have that global way of thinking. Can you talk a little bit about that and with what the importance of the Innovent deal?
I think that was a very good deal for both parties. I think in particular the fact that they're made a deal with Takeda as opposed to big, U.S. pharma was actually quite notable. But I will say this: Innovent is not your typical China biotech, right? There's probably 3 or 4 companies of size, right? B1, Innovent, ourselves at Akeso, maybe Cullinan, where we have the balance sheet and the capabilities to be able to do that, right? I think Innovent did a very, very good job in China commercializing their product. But this is not true for most biotech. Just like in the US, a lot of biotech don't have the resources, so they would actually take more capital and give away more later term.
I'm not sure how many US biotechs set themselves up and say, I'm going to be a global biotech.
Yeah. But I think to add to that point, and I think Simone, you brought up a very good example, I think the first company to really do this is actually Legend. And the reason that you can get this type of leverage, and I want to highlight the Legend as a really good example, Carvecchi was really the first case where a product, a therapy that came from China, fundamentally changed global standard of care. Right? Because here we talked about innovation, we talk about China speed, we talk about efficient capital. But end of the day, can a molecule that came out of China change standard of care for every human being on Earth? That's what we hope to do at Akeso with ivonescimab, by the way, right? And obviously with a bigger total addressable market for lung cancer, multiple myeloma. But I think Legend really pioneered that. And I think that needs to be emphasized. And I think looking at the long game, right? Can our product change standard of care for every human being on Earth? that confidence, and then the resources behind it, which Innovent has, their significant market cap, significant balance sheet, significant P&L in China to support that. That's what allowed them to do the deal with Takeda with those structure.
And that's, of course, Legend's deal with Johnson & Johnson for a CAR T. I saw Matt wanting to jump in there. Matt, what are your thoughts on the Innovent deal?
Well, I was just going to comment more on Innovent, but also the other comments around the clinical trials, because we've actually done some work around this on looking at how biotechs, specifically in the U.S., set up, clinical programs and what's important to them. It's usually single center, maybe 2 or 3 center clinical trials within one geo. And in fact, we've asked the question of various biotechs in the U.S., are you thinking about other geos? And the answer is always no, because they're not thinking about it until they get through almost a BLA filing before they start thinking about other geos. And so I think it is somewhat unique that something we see here in China, to John's point, that, where you're going to see these China biotechs really take on some multiple geos at the same time, even simultaneously, even if we're talking about China and Australia, where, with TGA, it's quite accepting of new trials. There's various tax credits that are there. You've got well-defined patient populations, with a lot of the population being sequenced even in different states in Australia. But then, of course, you're always looking at the U.S., because generally, even if it's not really reciprocity, but there will be one-way recognition of like a U.S. IND by China, by Australia, that minimizes your need to do additional activities to set up clinical activities.
Yeah, Matt, I wanted to ask you something. So, I took a few meetings this week when I wasn't on stage or doing things in this room, and with a few China biotechs I won't name and are much earlier stage than John or Bing's company. But, sat through a couple of presentations with them, and one thing that was struck me was that several companies, rather than saying sort of proof of concept, which I hear, you hear so much in the U.S., were instead saying proof of signal. That's what they were trying to get. They were trying to get to proof of signal so that they could essentially use early data to attract potential partners. So I don't know if what you think about that.
Yeah, we do have that structure, I would say, within the U.S. and Europe, but we classically call it like phase zeros or kind of looking glass trials, where we'll, similar to what Akeso Biotech did here, we'll dose 2, 3, 4 patients and then look for some efficacy signal. Depends on modality, because many times you're doing lead-in doses. And I think, to John's point, I think the white space that's optimized here that enables you to do that is one, kind of time to set up. So, within the US and Europe, it can take a year to activate a single clinical site, whereas here it's far, far shorter, let's just put it that way. And then I think, some of the other things that we see on the clinical side around spacing out dosing, required wait periods between dosing between patients, is much more minimized here on a risk-adjusted basis. So, we can speed things up and get to that signal much more quickly.
All right, we're going to go to a break shortly, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the talent. We're going to talk about the direction of innovation, and we're going to talk about the financial markets. So we'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
BioCentury This Week is brought to you by the 5th East-West Biopharma Summit in South Korea. An arc of innovation is emerging across Asia, and Western biopharma leaders are taking note, from cross-border deals to new COs. In March 2026, the 5th BioCentury Bay Helix East-West Biopharma Summit visits South Korea for the first time. Meet the biopharma leaders putting Korea innovation on the global map. Learn why Korea has become a clinical trial and manufacturing hub. Discover if Korea is the next hotspot for new co-formation. Plus, meet biopharma innovators from India to Singapore to China and Japan. Register now at biocenturyeastwest.com.
And we're back. Simone, I've heard from a lot of our Indian colleagues that they were a little pissed off at Josh that he made this meeting during Diwali. Last year, Josh kind of got me a little miffed because he made the meeting at Halloween.
Yeah.
But if you move it a little earlier, not only do you get to skip ESMO, which I'm sure everyone would love, but it could be during...
So I want to jump in here Jeff, and I think we have to break it to Josh. I've been hinting to him for 2 days, but there is this groundswell. There is this like huge number of people at this conference who want this conference set during the Shanghai Tennis Open next year, Josh. So, I'm going public with this, and the pressure's on.
We're working on it.
Most notably,
I think that was a yes, right? I think I heard a yes then.
most notably a young man named Alcaraz who has an intense interest in biotech, I understand. And he might want to become a stakeholder in Akeso or perhaps Duality.
Keynote
It
speaker.
could be
is what I
a
think.
family office. Maybe a family office.
And Simone, I also noticed you had some interesting looking socks on today. You want to tell us about
We're going this. I think you should start with Josh and Matt's socks.
Oh my goodness. Look at these
'cause-
things. BioCentury This Week podcast socks.
Yes, we
All
need to
right.
give full credit to Brian Dunker, who was mentioned earlier, for sourcing a whole bunch of BioCentury This Week socks this week in Shanghai. So if any of the listeners want a pair of socks, you should try to track down Jeff or Simone at the next event.
You got to come to a live podcast to get the socks. There's no. I want to tell you something. I was shamed at the last conference when I had to go with toenail color because I didn't have the socks. So I went out and bought some because I was on London on the way. Some nice London socks here.
Well, I'm paying respect to China here. I got some dragon socks because, that's what it's about.
They're a bit low res though. They need to be more.
They are low rise. It's true. I didn't have a lot of time before I got on the plane. So you may have seen that sign on some people's desks that say, "I'm silently judging your grammar." Has anyone see that sign? Maybe it's just an editor's thing. Here at BioCentury, when you're on a panel, we're silently judging your socks. And for being a good sport and coming out today, John, you've just won a pair of BioCentury This Week socks. All right. All right, well, let's turn to the financial markets. And hey, we have a CFO on our panel. So Bing, I'm going to go to you. What were you hearing this week?
I think across different stages of capital, I think earlier stage people talk about new co-formation and how they think about that, right? I think we have some experienced Chinese VCs like James Wang talk about it. It's another source of funding assets. But then we also had a panel that had some bankers and folks that are more later stage in the capital. I think Bing Li at Lake Blue also talked about this, that people are basically asking what is the state of the Hong Kong market. I think a lot of people are saying potentially there may be a correction, but it wouldn't be a bad thing. I think people are still optimistic long term, but maybe some near-term volatility is what we're hearing. But definitely a lot of folks have seen that biotech is innovating. I think at the end of the day, this is no different than NASDAQ, where you have to show the data. And so far, I think the China biotechs have delivered on the data.
So we've seen far more IPOs. I forget the exact number, but far more IPOs have gotten out on the Hong Kong exchange than NASDAQ this year. The key indexes in Hong Kong are way up. John, why was April the right time for you guys to go out? Until you got out, I think it had been pretty quiet.
We're the first one.
Yeah.
You sort of caught the beginning of the wave there, yeah.
Or maybe caught the beginning of the wave.
Maybe
They
caused
created the wave.
the wave, yeah.
I think because we are crazy. So we actually have a non-deal roadshow with investors in March. It's actually they're pretty enthusiastic about our asset because we have assets that have global potential. For example, our B73, we have the opt-in. We can co-develop with BioNTech. This is similar to like J&J with Nanjing Legend deal, co-development. And so many US long-term investors, they are very interested in this story. So we feel like, we might have a chance. And then according to plan, so we're going to launch IPO April and then hit the trade war. But at that time, to be honest, we have no other choice. We can back off, right? And choose another point. But who knows what's going to happen? So since I'm crazy, I just go out and do the IPO. So.
I want to go back to your point. I heard sort of a couple of themes. Now, what was the word you used? The word correction, right? And I think the words ranged from bubble. It's a bubble that will burst.
Trying hard not to say that word.
Yes, you tried, but other people said it, right? And then there was frothy, and then there was correction. And generally a feeling that valuations might be too high, but still, I would say net a positive kind of sentiment that things will maintain in a good direction. Is that, one was like, yes, we're out of the tunnel. Like, is the light at the end of the tunnel? We're out of the tunnel kind of thing.
Yeah, I think if I could comment on that, maybe more broadly, I think what we discovered is that investors all around the world have no problem investing in the Hong Kong market. It's a very robust market. It's a very developed market. I think after New York, maybe after London, Hong Kong's a very developed market that gives people a lot of confidence in the quality of investors, the quality of the regulatory requirement to be listed, and then, the quality of the companies here. So at Akeso, we did a $250 million raise last October. In August, we did a $450 million raise. Most of the investors are overseas. Right? We have a lot of investors that came in from Europe. We have quite a bit from the US and obviously Singapore and other areas, but it's a very international set of investors that came into our cap table. So I think with that in mind, and obviously, we're of a different size than many of the other companies that recently listed, but I think good quality companies can list in Hong Kong and don't feel like it's somehow a handicap just because you're not on NASDAQ. So that is kind of the thing that I would say I want to emphasize is that the Hong Kong market is quite robust. It's going to have your up and downs like any other market, but we're attracting very international European and North American investors into our cap table.
Yeah, Bing, I mean, I think for our U.S. listeners, the idea that it's in a bubble or that there's a rational exuberance, it might be a bit of a shock to folks that haven't been following the story this year. But, I had a few discussions this week where a discussion with one of the top lawyers in Hong Kong as well as one of the top bankers who both told me independently that they were turning away work, that they literally couldn't handle the workload and were turning away good clients that they would have normally taken because they were afraid they couldn't deliver the work. I thought that was an interesting take when the bankers are turning away too much work. I won't use the word bubble, but maybe there's something going on. But there's also a long queue, right? Because you need to get approved to go IPO in Hong Kong, and there's a pretty long queue right now.
The wait was like, what is it, 6 months? I mean, it's a long wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, 6 to 8 months. Can I pick up on something else that you talked about? You talked about people rewarding innovation and investors understanding that, tying that together. That's sort of what I wanted to pick up on as well in terms of a thread. Tying that together, let's go all the way back to what you said about Legends, setting a new standard. You yourselves did that at Akeso with the summit data where you told the world, wait, we can actually be better.
I'm sorry, our data.
Your data.
Akeso data, just to be clear.
Sorry, absolutely right. The Akeso data, right, within the partnership, but the Akeso data that grabbed the attention of the world because it could be better than Keytruda alone. And so that was, I think, for many people, a turning point, meaning turning their heads to look at, wait a minute, this isn't just a fast follower story. And what we're now starting to see is more what we call first order innovation. So one of the themes that I wanted to raise, Jeff, China is known so well for, and we heard this throughout the last 2 days, its incredible ability to do anything with an antibody fast and whatever you want, right? You can make it an ADC, a bispecific ADC, you can make it a bispecific, various things. But one of the questions that came up is it going to start now? Is the next wave going to be siRNA? So we heard that in several different threads, and I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, well, I guess we also heard a lot about gene and cell therapy. What was the number of programs?
Well, the number that I think you're thinking about is, I think Nisa said there are 130 in vivo CAR T programs.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And then Bin Li said he thought that siRNA would be comparable to that quickly. Matt, from where you sit, where do you see the direction of innovation going in China?
Yeah, I mean, coming back to the cell and gene therapy numbers, I mean, we track those via several consortia that we're a part of. And generally still, I would say that the U.S. is first still in assets and trials. China has been very, very quickly catching up, though, and is definitely nipping at the heels of the U.S. And certainly, I think we're seeing that speed up now. And then we're seeing a lot of the kind of seminal platforms in nucleic acids around siRNA, but other nucleic acid platforms in general. And they're coming up to the point where there can be some additional innovation done to them. I think it's, given the experience and the track record that China and the innovators here have in antibodies, it is, a ripe area for further innovation and optimization. We've got some really good de-risking in terms of clinical assets that have gone on to become commercial, and then in multiple geos, they've worked out pretty well. We didn't touch on this earlier, but another thing that it can be a difficulty is getting clinicians comfortable with a new modality and then giving it to patients or prescribing it for patients. I know within advanced therapies, we always talk about vein-to-vein time, but the actual term that we started using lately is brain-to-vein, because that's when the clinicians will actually start prescribing them to the patients in large numbers, which is ultimately what determines a commercial success. So I think that coupled with, kind of the familiarity of regulators and reimbursement strategies is going to be, present a pretty nice opportunity there.
We're kind of coming up on time, and I do want to get to talent, but John, I really do want to get your take as sort of being at the forefront of ADCs. What are you excited about? What are you kind of hearing about bubbling up? Just real quick.
Real quick, actually, 1 year ago, I said something that's actually, at that time, it's very radical. In BioCentury forum, I said, be watch out, Chinese biotech is coming. Because biotech is biology plus technology. And the Chinese biotech, we are very strong in engineering. This year, I'm going to say a slightly different point. I think the boundary between biology, we will talk about target, right? And the technology, if we talk about the ADC's linker payload, it's actually become blurred. Because if you have a strong technology, then it can really help you validate your biology. Actually, you can speed up your science and therefore have a true innovation, like a PD-1 VEGF. I'm not sure that's biology or engineering. We talk about bispecific, but the boundary is blurred. In summary, I think the true innovation will come out from Chinese biotech.
I agree with that.
All right, well, talent is shifting. That's one thing I learned this week. Back in the day, the leaders of China biotech companies 10 years ago, they were returnees, the so-called sea turtles, who they went to get their PhD in the US. They worked at Novartis, J&J, you name it. They came back, they founded companies. And I was talking to Vince Deng this week, who is at MedFine Capital, and he started a new fund a few years ago. And he said, for him, he was like, hey, I'm going to look at the person who was number 2, number 3, number 4, working for one of these returnees and work with them to set up a new company. And so that was interesting to me. What have you been hearing, Sloan?
Yeah, I mean, this came up. I had a conversation with Kevin Lee. It also came up on the panel, the scene setter panel. And so definitely this generation, I'm going to call it our generation, in China, those folks, it was standard to go to the US, get your training, get your credibility, and come, and those people then came back to China. And that's been the mantra. In fact, that's been the mantra globally. It was the mantra in the UK and Europe as well. And what I'm hearing is that this emerging generation in China of, maybe the next leaders, they don't feel that they have to go to the US in order to get the training. And I think, Matt, you made the point earlier when we talked that they may still get the training of how things are done now in China by working from MNC inside China and or, as you point, Jeff, working for people who've done that. The point that I was making was that generation doesn't feel the need to go to the US. There'll be more domestically generated, talent. And the analogy was like, there was Genentech, and then Genentech spawned a whole number of, other companies. Matt, looks like you want to respond.
Yeah, I mean, I'll reiterate what I said this morning, which was that, to your story, Jeff, how did that fund find those people? They went to the people that trained in the US. That's the starting point. Right. And it's not to say that, it's going to evolve from that point, but the starting point remains that the only way they're finding those people is by finding the people that went and trained in the US and came back. So if we start from that anchor, if you will, then certainly you can iterate upon that, and then, there's going to be subsequent generations, so to speak, of talent that don't need to then go to the US, but have the pedigree of training under folks. And I think back to John's point around taking a more global outlook as a Chinese biotech, I mean, to me, that happens from this first generation of talent that trained in the US, came back, has the experience of global commercialization versus local commercialization. And if you look at a lot of the US biotechs, like I said before, I mean, I'll say the reason why a lot of those US biotechs focus on US only is because a lot of times those folks only know how to commercialize in the US. They don't necessarily know how to commercialize in China. They don't know how to commercialize in Japan, Korea, anywhere here in APAC. So, I mean, I think it gives a kind of a really good legitimacy to the Chinese biotech scene that they've got a more global outlook on the talent.
Can we get your thoughts on this as well? You know, running a company, and what are you seeing?
Well, we definitely see a mix, right? So I guess a lot of the senior management have overseas experience, myself included, but I would say the next layer down, right? The VPs and the directors are all mostly domestic talent and trained. Some of them at other China biotech, some of them at multinationals. I think a lot of our folks in CMC and manufacturing, for example, worked at the multinationals in China, because those you actually need to know best-in-class Western processes. So I think we definitely seen that trend, and in the next few years, as these folks get more experience, they'll move into senior management, position and becoming some of the C-suite. We're already seeing a lot of that. But I think one point I wanted to kind of highlight adjacent to this topic is I think the best quote that I heard for the last few days came from George Chen from D3. He said, "You only start a biotech if you fundamentally want to come up and develop a drug to save humanity. That's the only reason to do it." So I think I want to bring this back, and all the topic about talents. I mean, we can't forget the entrepreneurs, right? I mean, you think about Michelle Xia, our CEO and co-founder, right? She basically, with her 3 other co-founders, willed Akeso and Avonisumab into existence. I mean, look at John, right? I would say you have to give a lot of the credit to the entrepreneurs, just like in the West, that actually will these companies into existence.
All right. Well, we're up on time. Josh is sort of the man who brought all this together. Josh, parting thought?
Yeah, I mean, first off, just wanted to thank everyone for coming out this week to the China Summit. I thought the energy was just infectious. It was amazing. So really appreciate everybody bringing the energy, the partnering, the hallway discussions, and all the great discussions on stage as well. And we would very much love to have you guys back next year when we come for our 13th China Healthcare Summit. We'll also be in Asia again in March, BioCentury, Bay Helix, and McKinsey with our 5th East-West Summit in Seoul, Korea. So we very much hope to see everybody at that event as well, because we think there's a lot of opportunities across Asia that are starting to emerge now.
And I'd very much like to thank Matt Hewitt, VP and CTO of Charles Rivers Manufacturing Business Division, John Zhu, CEO of Duality Biologics, and Bing Wang, CFO of Akeso, and Simone, of course, and Josh as ever. And thank all of you for listening in. We hope that you tune into our podcast, like it, subscribe to it. And for our listeners around the world, we will catch you next Monday with a new episode of the BioCentury This Week podcast.